do that. But in the absence of those sorts of characteristics, the method, I'm sure that, and the doctors will correct me if I'm wrong, but the method of consumption of THC is daily, or more than daily. So what that means is you have always got a level of THC, unless you're taking straight CBD, and I'll come to that soon. You will always have a level of THC in your system. And generally speaking, that level will be detectable because you're topping it up or taking more every single day. So what this means is that the battle for medicinal cannabis is being thwarted by these utterly absurd drug driving laws. And let's see how they work. Unlike every other prescription medicine, cannabis is guided by a cut-off level that has absolutely nothing to do with affectation. The level is 5 nanograms. That's 5,000 millionth of a gram. If that is detectable in your saliva, then you have a positive test. If it's over 10 nanograms, that's the cutoff above which they will prosecute. That means that unless you are using straight CBD, if you are using THC, then you are at risk of being detected. Now, this doesn't apply to Valium, it doesn't apply to opioids, it doesn't apply to barbiturates, it doesn't apply to any of those other drugs on prescription. With those drugs, sensibly, it's if you are adversely affected, if you're driving under the influence. Of course that makes sense. We don't want people falling half asleep on opioids weaving down the roads. Nor do we want to see people stoned completely out of their brains weaving down the roads. But cannabis, it is a detectable level, yet it is prescribed. Now that makes no sense at all on any logical viewpoint. That if you are going to allow people to have a prescription for cannabis and then prohibit them from having any cannabis in their system, then what that does is it's a deterrent to using medicinal cannabis and an unovercomable deterrent for many people. So I wanted to run through in the next 25, 30 minutes or so before I answer questions. Firstly, what the law is and how it works. Secondly, some of the available defences and their limitations. And thirdly, a little bit of a rave of why I think we are where we are and what we can do about it. So, firstly, some of the myths surrounding drug driving. The first myth that I want to deal with is, well, the testing's random, so your chances of getting caught are very limited. That is not quite true that the testing is random. You only have to come to Mardi Gras to know that they don't bother policing the streets anymore. What they do is they put cannabis drug detection buses at every exit and entrance to Nimbin, and that way, that's their method of thumbing their nose. But it's worse than that, because the way number plate recognition works is that as the police car's driving along, the number plate is automatically photographed and recognised and computerised, and ping, up comes on their screen any previous involvement with the police relating to drugs, postcodes, and one can imagine that Nimbin would be somewhere high on their list, and any other police intelligence that relates to that motor vehicle or the owner of that motor vehicle, all in an instant. And that's why so many people come before the courts charged twice with this. And it's because once they've been charged once, every time they drive past a police car, the police car stops them and and forces them to have a test again. It's not random. It picks on specific classes of people, and it does so deliberately. That's what the police policy is, to do that. Of course, there's still random testing, which you may well get caught at, but largely it's not random. When I was a magistrate sitting in Lismore, there was a bust in Nimbin where I threw the evidence out because they got the wrong address on a search warrant. That car was then targeted, the owner of the house, was then targeted by the police repeatedly for drug driving. That's the sort of lack of randomness that I saw and now see in practice. The second myth is that it's a road safety measure. You only need to look at the statistics for what happened when they brought in random breath testing. I'm going to fake a graph. Growth, road toll, down. Breath testing, reducing the road toll. Same with 50 kilometre an hour in suburban areas. Same with seat belts. Same with a whole airbags. Same with a whole range of road safety measures. Introduction of random drug testing, no change to the road toll whatsoever. Not even a bump in the road toll. COVID, of course, created a levelling, but if this is a road safety measure, as they keep saying it is the most failed road safety measure ever. And why do they continue with it? The stats are there to show that this has had no impact on the rising road toll, on road trauma, and yet if you listen to the ministers, Labor, Liberal, whatever, they talk about it as a road safety measure. It's not. The third myth is that it stops people driving under the influence. The truth is that if people are driving under the influence, there is a separate offence. It has higher penalties, as it should. But this has nothing to do with driving under the influence and everything to do with a detectable, minute level. And of course, what that means is that for different... we heard the doctors today, and I was very interested to hear them say that, cannabis reacts differently for different people, and it's a matter of getting the dosage right. Similarly, of course, cannabis remains in the system for longer for different people. And thus, people who appeared before me, in the case of Carroll, which is a reported decision of mine from Lismore, 9 days later, he was detected. The prosecution didn't dispute that it was 9 days later. He was detected with more than the 10 nanogram threshold. So that's mind you, he hadn't taken, I should emphasise, this was not a prescribed dose, this was a smoking session at a party. It's illegal anyway. This is the other myth. Another myth is that it's illegal to use cannabis anyway. Well, it's not in the ACT. It's not for anyone with a prescription, and it's an extremely minor offence. They don't take away your driver's licence if you're convicted of sexual assault or murder or assault or breaching a domestic violence order, but they take your licence away from you for having a detectable level of cannabis in your system. Go figure. The next myth I want to deal with is that death and injury stats show that illicit drugs, cannabis in particular, is the major cause of road trauma. Now, seriously, there are people who say this. They quote this mythical figure that in 15% of all fatalities, cannabis is present. That's pretty interesting, because they're not just testing drivers, they're also testing passengers who were killed in car accidents. They're also testing at 2 nanograms, that number. And if you look at the cohort of people who die in motor vehicle accidents and their age range, in fact, that is not an over-representative number for having residual amounts of cannabis in their system. But nobody bar nobody in the academic research world will ever say that cannabis causes the accidents. They're very careful not to say that because, of course, it doesn't. Just because something is correlated, that is, there's cannabis in the system of those who suffer road trauma, does not equate to causation. So that is just another fallacy along the road. Next fallacy is that it's only a traffic offence, you don't get a criminal record. Without going into the complications of it, going to court or getting a drug conviction or paying a fine and having a traffic record for a drug offence has really significant impacts on people's lives. A glazier, a friend of ours who's a glazier, got a drug driving matter, went to court, got a Section 10, which is a conviction, finding the offence proven, no conviction. He had to still declare it on his workers' comp and his insurance, which then skyrocketed to the extent he could no longer work. Similarly, a security guard, he's been quite well publicised in Sydney, not a security guard, a guy who owns a security company, went to court for a drug driving offence, and even though, again, our conviction wasn't recorded against him, his master licence was suspended. He's now spending 12 to 18 months in NCAT fighting it. Third, and a really serious consequence, is insurance. Amy's insurance policy says that if you are driving, if the person who's operating a motor vehicle has more than the legal amount in their saliva, blood, blah, 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 of any drug, then the policy is void. Now, what's the legal limit for alcohol? 0.05. We're all fine with that. What's the legal limit for cannabis? 0. Hence, I got a phone call, and I was so staggered I couldn't believe this, from a lawyer mate in Sydney who's got a client who had a Mercedes write-off incident, completely uninsured, because he had 0.2 of a gram of cannabis in his blood, because he had to go to hospital because the airbags went off, blah, blah, had the blood test. No insurance. Insurance policy void because he's got more than a legal amount. I quickly went and checked my NRMA policy, and it's fine. It just says as long as you're not driving under the influence. But this is the extent of the legal framework that we are living in. Next myth is that it discourages drug use, that is, the drug driving laws. Well, it does discourage some drug use, but it doesn't discourage other drug use. It certainly doesn't discourage alcohol, it doesn't discourage opioids, it doesn't discourage a whole range of prescription drugs, all of which have discernible impacts on driving when taken at prescribable levels. So to suggest that, and of course, it doesn't discourage drugs that are not, cannabis is special because it's fat soluble. It stays in your system for a lot longer. Whereas if I'm a 19-year-old and I want to go out on a Friday night and get off my tree, I suppose I've got some options. I could spend money on alcohol at a pub, which would cost me, I don't know, probably $100. Am I about $100? Even more? I could smoke some cannabis, but then I'd be concerned about driving when I, have my next plumbing job on the Monday. Or, of course, I could take ice, which is not fat soluble, is probably out of your system well and truly by the Monday morning, and costs you a minuscule percentage of that. So what these drug driving laws do is discourage cannabis use, but they don't discourage prescription drug use, they don't discourage water-soluble illicit drug use, and they certainly don't discourage dangerous drug use. There are some drugs that aren't picked up by this at all, LSD, psilocybin, etc., etc. Not for one moment suggesting that they're necessarily dangerous drugs. I heard the last talk. Next myth is that nowhere else has these stupid drug laws without having a excuse or a defence for those who are on prescription. Well, they do. Tasmania is the living Australian example. In Tasmania, if you have a prescription for any illicit drug, and of course, effectively that really only means cannabis, then that is a defence to the drug driving detection laws. Hallelujah, and that's been in place for 5 years. The sky has not fallen in, yet every person I speak to, the ministers and all the rest of it, say it's impossible. Well, guess what? England, Canada, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, all have defences of prescription drug use, of prescription cannabis as a defence. Why don't we have it here? Well, Fiona Patten has a bill before Victorian Parliament right now that is being met with the most illogical opposition from police and from parliamentarians, particularly Conservative parliamentarians and Labor Party parliamentarians. There is a bill being put up by the Greens in South Australia. Massive opposition to it. I spoke to parliamentarians there on this topic, and they kept asking me questions like, well, how do we know that the cannabis that they're using is actually the prescription stuff? And I'm like, well, how do you know that the beer that someone's drinking isn't stolen? Does it really make any difference? The difference is whether people are driving in a way or under the influence that is dangerous. They didn't get that. I got the feeling I was talking to myself, which is usual. Prescription drugs, the next myth I want to deal with relates to prescription drugs. There are two really key studies on this which show that those people, and I'm sure the doctors would support me in this, that people, when they are using medicinal cannabis, use less prescription medication. And of course that makes sense. If I'm suffering from chronic pain and I am on a whole range of opioids to deal with that, and I'm finding THC, CBD is easing my pain, I am going to reduce my level of opioids. So, in fact, I would argue that the use of prescription cannabis is far safer for road users, I mean all road users, than the use of heavy-duty prescription pain-killing medication. Finally, I just want to deal with the myth, well, isn't it great that we've got CBD over the counter? Well, it is going to be great that we've got CBD over the counter, don't get me wrong, I think that's a terrific thing. But, and here's the sting in the tail, but they are going to allow up to 1% THC. That's great. I'm totally in favour of that. I think it makes more sense from a whole drug perspective and all of the things that we heard today. Fantastic. But there has been no studies. So I asked Michael yesterday, I said, Michael, what is the level of THC if I went to just buy some not skunky, horrible fall asleep cannabis, but sort of giggly party cannabis off the street here in Nimbin? What would the THC level be? And he said, maybe 10% if you're lucky, probably more likely 6%. So if they're allowing 1% THC in CBD over the counter, you can't drive. And how long can't you drive for? Well, I don't know. The experts don't know. The government doesn't know. Everybody's different. So if you buy CBD oil over the counter, then sorry, but you are going to be at risk of losing your licence, criminal record, all the rest of it if you drive. That's, of course, assuming, I'm guessing, you take it every day, because probably after 24 hours you may well be okay, but as I understand it, the best medical use of these drugs is daily or more often than that. So I wrote to the Minister for Health and said, look, before you do this, or while you do this, you should at least run some studies with using the saliva testing and see what happens if people use 1% THC CBD oil over the counter, because that would be a good start so that people can at least know if they're going to be committing a criminal offence with all the consequences. Surprisingly, I haven't heard back. But the fact that they refuse to fund these studies again leaves the whole CBD thing up in the air, because with 1% THC, who knows whether you're going to be picked up by the testing or not. Now, it is said that very few people who are using as low as 1% do get picked up drug driving. That may be, but very few is not the same as having any degree of certainty whatsoever, and this needs to be clarified. Interestingly, even in Tasmania, keep in mind that the defence in Tasmania is only if you have a prescription. If you don't need a prescription, the defence isn't going to cover you, which is one of the great ironies of that silliness. I should say that in the ACT, of course, they've taken the big brave step of effectively legalising cannabis. Now, but they haven't changed the drug driving laws. So what that means is that you can use, but you can't drive, even if you're not driving under the influence. So they are my myths that I hope explain to some extent why I'm so infuriated by this. I was, the last few years of being a magistrate, I was in Lismore, the last 10 years, and I would get about somewhere between 30 and 50 a week of these charges. Mardi Gras, was a different story altogether. We had to set aside a whole separate court just to deal with Mardi Gras drug driving charges. I kid you not. Same with the festivals at Byron Bay. After those, we need to have a separate whole day for possession charges. So I got completely disheartened and disgusted with having to take people's licences off them. I mean, what the hell? These are people who desperately need their licences. They have not done anything that harms anybody, and they are being punished. And let's face it, you take the licence off a country person, they would beg me, fine me whatever you like, put me on a good behaviour bond, but don't take my licence from me. No choice. Mandatory minimum disqualification periods. Absolute tragedy. So what are, the next section I just want to deal with briefly is what are some of the defences and what are not defences. Now, never a week goes by when I'm not stopped in the street by someone who says, but I've got a prescription, I keep it in the glove box, if I show the prescription, they have to let me go. That is mistaking law for justice, because that's just not correct. There is no defence of having a prescription. You can pull out your prescription all you like, and it's not going to make any difference. Now, because of soft magistrates like myself, they changed the law so that when you are apprehended, the police have a choice. They can immediately suspend your licence, and then you have to go to court to try and get it back, or they can give you a ticket, etc., and the disqualification period kicks in later. That's in New South Wales. The impact of that is that even if you have a prescription, you will be off the road at police discretion, not even by court discretion, until you can get to a court, which may well be weeks or months. So a prescription is not a defence. Nor is it a defence to say, on its own, to say that, well, I don't smoke cannabis, I must have got it passively. I do have to tell you a story. There was an expert sitting in court saying, turned to me and said, you know, but this is all assuming that you're in a glass box surrounded by people smoking cannabis and no windows open and breathing in. Oh, then maybe, but who would do that? And I'm thinking, she obviously didn't come to Byron Bay in a panel van in 1979. Or she didn't catch the train, the second-class carriages from Lismore to Sydney. I was stoned by casino. So, but passive smoking is not of itself a defence. If you have a detectable level of, and I had people in this exact situation, people who were caring for somebody who was dying, people who were in closed spaces with people who were bonging on, and passively consumed cannabis. That is not of itself a defence. Doesn't matter how it gets into your system. If it's in your system, that's the crime. The second, but what is a defence is if you can show that you have an honest and reasonable mistake about the cannabis in your system. Go back to Mr. Carroll, who was 9 days. He gave evidence that he'd looked up the government website. At that stage it said 12 to 24 hours. He had waited over a week before he drove. Therefore, he honestly and reasonably believed that he had no cannabis left in his system. Similarly, people who didn't know that they could absorb it by being in an enclosed space. I've got to tell you something else too. The lead study about closed spaces is an American study where they get this glass box with a tiny little fan, and they stand a person in there with 5 or 6 other people around them smoking big joints. And then they take them out of there and they saliva test the person who wasn't smoking. And obviously, there's a period of hours whereby you can still have a detectable level of cannabis from passive smoking. The lead author of that is someone called Gregory Cohn. Now, I just thought that was just classic. It's like Dr. Death, really. Or Death. So, there is a defence available if you overcome the evidential burden of showing that you honestly and reasonably believe that you didn't have any cannabis in your system. I dealt with a case where a woman had rubbed balm. She had asked her doctor. She had a letter from her doctor saying that that could not absorb through the skin. But there was an expert witness who said, well, you know, and then mouth, etc., etc. So she was, again, she could show that she honestly and reasonably believed she had no cannabis in her system, and she was acquitted. But it's a hard defence. It's a defence that requires deep pockets, many thousands of dollars. Legal aid won't fund anything in that traffic jurisdiction. So you would need many thousands of dollars to run such a case like that and seek to prove, at least start to prove, that you had an honest and reasonable mistake of fact. They are really the only defences available to this. There's one other that I want to mention, and that's necessity. The leading necessity cases are where a person, for example, is driving their pregnant, giving birth in labour partner to hospital and drives through a red light. That sort of necessity is able to be used as a defence. I've been waiting for the right case to use that defence for people who live in rural areas, etc., but yet to be untested. The other defence, which has yet to be tried and won't be, is what I call the Catillaris defence, which is you go before a jury and you say, this law is so completely stupid, you should find me not guilty anyway, which Andrew Catillaris did. And if you Google Andrew Catillaris, you'll see that a jury acquitted him of a mass supply of cannabis to medical patients on that basis. These drug driving offences never get to a jury because they're summary. They're only heard before a magistrate. And magistrates are not as nice as juries when it comes to this. So, what is likely to happen to you if you go to court? It is an absolute lottery. That is the truth. I trained magistrates for decades, literally, throughout Australia, and inconsistency in sentencing is a problem. But in this area, it is a catastrophe. There is about half the magistrates in New South Wales that you go before, if it's a first offence, if you've got a prescription, or even if you haven't, if you've got a letter from your doctor saying this is medicinal use, etc., first offence, you will leave court with your licence, without a criminal conviction and without a fine. But the other half, you won't. And so it is essentially a lottery as to which magistrate you get. And it's localised, the problem, so that in a particular town where two magistrates sit, one will always deal with it by way of that, a good result, and one will always deal with it by way of a heavy result. That is absurd, but it is what it is. Okay, so why are we here? Why have we got this completely crazy situation? I think that you need to look firstly at who are the biggest donors to New South Wales political parties. Pharmaceutical company and alcohol companies are up there with the top of the list. Clubs, alcohol industry, pubs, pharmaceuticals. And they win out of these drug driving laws. They are the winners because people go back to their prescription drugs. They are the winners because people go back to alcohol. The alcohol industry wants a monopoly. The pharmaceutical industry wants a monopoly. And they are threatened by this drug. And therefore, they act against what I believe to be the interests of those who wish to use medicinal cannabis. It's a form of discrimination, as I said before, that doesn't apply to any other prescription drug, and the only reason is because once it was illicit. The second reason, and on this I've been doing some research on the whole issue of why some countries and states have gone down the legalisation, decriminalisation, medical marijuana without these silly drug driving laws. What are the determinative features of those places over ours? And what is crystal clear is that in terms of drug law reform generally, I already talked about the political donation system. The second factor is the existence of the Murdoch press. They are so, we had this sort of pathetic little movement in New South Wales just recently, towards the end of last year, where after the ICE inquiry and blah, blah, they were just going to change drug laws an incy bit. Front page of the Daily Telegraph, bunch of dopes, all the Liberal cabinet ministers who were going to support this minor change. The Murdoch press, and I'm not sure if it's this symbiotic relationship they have with the alcohol industry. I'm not sure whether it's just Murdoch's Christian conservatism. I'm not even sure as to whether it has to do with the symbiotic relationship they have with the police. But the fact is that they are stridently anti-drugs and drug law reform, and those countries that lack a big Murdoch influence are the countries, go figure, who have moved forward on medicinal decriminalisation, legalisation of drugs. And in fact, you can map it state by state throughout America as to the influence of the Murdoch press. Now, in Australia, we have the biggest concentration in the world of newspapers owned by the Murdoch press. And when you add that to the pharmaceutical industry and alcohol industry's influence, they're two factors. And there's a third factor. What is apparent in those countries where we've seen drug law reform is a police service that is on side with drug law reform. We certainly don't have that here. In fact, the police commissioners around the country, with the perhaps exception of the federal police, which is maybe why we've seen movement in the ACT and Northern Territory, are absolutely anti any form of drug law reform, and they've got the politicians spooked. So when you have those three factors, corruption via political donation, Murdoch press influence, plus the police attitude, I mean, in Canada, it's really why they got such drug law reform through. Same as Portugal, same as the Netherlands, same as some of those states in America, because the police were effectively on side. Why? Because they see far more important things like child sexual abuse, like domestic violence, like all of that far more important. We don't see that as far more important at least the police services don't see that. What does that have to do with drug driving? A lot. Because this is, I think, the battle that's being waged for drug law reform. There is a fear in those three institutions that I just mentioned that medicinal cannabis will lead to a leg in the door for decriminalisation and an end to prohibition. It might. It might. And, you know, I think we needn't shy away from that as being a possibility. But they, therefore, the drug driving laws are their defence to the medicinal cannabis industry, to people who want to use cannabis as a drug because of their fear of it leading to an end to prohibition. And I guess their fear is partly well placed. Many states in America started off with decriminalisation of cannabis for medicinal purposes, or legalisation for medicinal purposes, and moved to full legalisation. But the drug driving laws need to be viewed, at least in my view, from that perspective, that this is their last stand against changes to the drug laws, the last stand against following even the mother of prohibition, America, down its path of legalisation and stopping jailing people for drugs. So, I'm more than happy to take questions on drug driving and on cannabis law generally, if people have any questions.
Can I start off first, please? I do have one question to quickly ask you. You can, it's got two parts. One is you can actually be stopped at the side of the road by a policeman, and before he gives you that cannabis test, you can actually take some cannabis as per the legislation, and then that would theoretically make that test null and void. Have you, in your experience, ever had something like that? And just to append to it, what were the most interesting cases for defence of medical cannabis driving? I only ask because I'm going to court on this, so it's good to know.
I have not heard before the idea of stuffing some cannabis into your mouth.
That's Queensland.
Just prior to do the test.
It's in the Queensland law that the test is null and void if you've had a sample.
The test may be null and void, but if you did that with alcohol in New South Wales, there's a specific offence in New South Wales of interfering with the test by taking alcohol between the demand and the sample. But more than that, of course, you could be charged with in New South Wales at least, you could be charged with a whole range of offences, far more serious than the drug driving one, which after all doesn't have a jail term. Keep in mind, possession of cannabis carries a 2-year maximum jail term in Australia. So if you put cannabis into your mouth and they seized any of it or whatever. Now, I have also been asked regularly, well, what about mouthwash and etc.? I don't know the answer to that. I would I know that the Hemp Embassy has run some little brilliant little studies using the test kits and people trying various mouthwashes, and did they work?
The first test is not that reliable. Lots of things work, but nothing's guaranteed.
Yeah. So disguising or trying to cover up your use. There is and I'm sure if the doctors are here, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but an expert gave evidence to me that if you took the cannabis oil capsule anally, like a suppository, then it could not get into your saliva. I thought that was probably... I thought instead of passing the joint at parties, we could have... we could have drop your pants, but it would certainly make parties more interesting, perhaps more suited. Yeah, I won't go further. But can I say that, yes, what Gerald said is quite correct. It doesn't have the same impact in terms of getting stoned, but in terms of taking it medicinally, there's probably research to be done. And according to Dr. Judith Pearl, who was a forensic expert in New South Wales, the forensic expert, it cannot then show up in your saliva. Of course, some people believe that taking capsules of oil avoids the problem of it being in your saliva too. Unfortunately, burping, vomiting, any sort of reflux can have an influence on this, so I would not suggest that that is a safe way of avoiding the drug driving laws. In terms of the most interesting cases on drug driving, I have to say that the number of people, I really can't talk to interest, but I can talk to human interest, and that is never before these drug driving laws came in did I have people coming to court and begging. Never before. I mean, it is absolutely heartbreaking. Single mum, lives in Drake, needs to drive the kids, works at the club, lives a bit out of town. You know, her whole life is shattered by not having a driver's licence, and she was using as a result of a prescription. You know, like people begging me in tears for their licences, which I couldn't give. So yes, human interest rather than interest. Any other questions?
Yes, we'll go through everyone.
There's a question right up the back there.
So I'm in first. So you nearly touched on it with Judith Pearls. So generally we're believing that, didn't she say in court that if you smoke, they're after residue of cannabis in your mouth, I think, when they test you. So it's generally a bit thought that if you smoke, they'll pick it up. If you eat a cookie, they'll probably pick it up. But if you eat a capsule and don't burp, you're probably okay. I mean, clearly the first test is not that reliable, and the police then say, don't worry, we'll do a second test, and they send the second test off for a third test, which is guaranteed going to get you. Okay. Because it's in a lab. But you really think the capsules aren't so?
I think that we're going to have a little joint session. I mean, more than one person up here in a moment, and so I might leave that for Dr. John might have a word on that. But here's how the tests work. The first test, you only get to the second test if you fail the first test. So the first test is really important. She says, Dr. Pearl, that for the first test, it is impossible for cannabis to cross the blood to saliva threshold, unless you have wounds or ulcers in your mouth, things like that. Brushing your teeth could stimulate it, etc. But the truth is, looking for ways around this is never going to be a solution. And I suppose the real reason comes down to this, and I think Dr. Tay and others spoke on this. Really, there's not that much difference between recreational use and medicinal use. I mean, really, at the heart of it, a lot of people who are, having a joint before they go to sleep every night are doing it for medicinal reasons. People who suffer from PTSD and so wake up to a joint in the morning, they may not have a prescription, but if their driving is not affected, this law should not be in place. That's really my message. And I would urge you and those looking online to go to your local member, to complain and say, this is ridiculous. I've got a prescription, but my life is being ruined because I can't drive. That's really the message. Yeah.
Just a quick one in terms of impairment, and this is something I'd like to know from an expert. Is there any method overseas in Canada where we can have a level of impairment tested, like a blood alcohol test?
Sure. Look, it's a really good question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. I just want to remember Druid. Don't let me forget. So, with alcohol, we have a cut-off level. Now, I don't drink. I haven't had a drink for 25 years. If I have a glass of wine, my reading will be probably 0.02, and I will be pissed and a danger on the road because I am a naive user and I only have to smell alcohol and I need to have a nap. So, alcohol levels are an approximation of affectation. That's how they work. And as a society, we sort of accept that. We know that a seasoned alcoholic at 0.05 could probably pass cognitive tests as to road safety. But we've got an approximation, and as a community, we say that's okay. It is possible to get an approximation with cannabis. It is possible, like they do in the UK, to have a level of nanograms that equates to an average of affectation in driving. And of course, it is exponentially greater than our 5/10 nanograms, depending on what state you're in. So, but secondly, there is a brilliant app which is now being used throughout the United States and in one part of Canada, which is called Druid. And you can get this app, and it's really brilliant because what you do is the police show it to you by the side of the road, and you have to, follow the numbers, and then you have to stand on one leg, and it records whether you're balancing or not. Look at my yoga pose. Do you see that? Dristy point. Perfect. So I'd pass. So all of that, so Druid is quite a good test for, and has gone through phase 3 studies of people who've smoked or drank or used drugs, and it does test affectation quite well. Of course, if the police believe you are driving under the influence, if you're showing any signs of that, they can force you to go to the to the hospital and give a blood sample. That's how the whole system operated prior to this silliness. Then an expert, pathologist, would give evidence as to the amount plus your driving or whatever else, and you could be found guilty. And most people, of course, pleaded guilty to drive under the influence charges. 97% of people charged with that offence plead guilty. So it's not as though it's difficult to prove people are driving under the influence to get to that level. So 2 answers to your question. First is Druid, and second is we can have levels that equate to affectation, and it's not going to be, they always say, oh, this is impossible because some people are affected more than others. Well, gee whiz, that's true with alcohol too. It's also the case that, and I was asked this question by a South Australian parliamentarian, how else can we tell if people are stoned or not? And I said, well, perhaps the same way that you tell if people have had too much endone or too many Valiums or too many of other drugs. It's exactly the same problem. Why pick on cannabis just because it was once illegal? So that's the answer to your question, I hope. Yes?
Hello, David. Thanks for the talk. It's great. I'm intrigued when you mention these countries that have drug law reform, Holland, Canada, etc. You mentioned England, but they have a huge Murdoch influence. Is it because the police are on side there? Is that the difference?
Yes. There are very few, I used to quote a figure that was totally wrong, but there are very few cannabis possession charges in England in comparison to New South Wales and Australia. Very few. And yes, it remains illegal. The point I was trying to make about the UK was they have an absolute complete defence to drug detection driving, which is if you have a prescription, you're in the clear. And Drive Change, an organisation that I'm a member of, if you Google it, look it up, all we're arguing for is a really narrow thing, which is those with prescriptions, as a first step, those with prescriptions should have a defence. Same as Tasmania, same as England, same as other places. But you're right about England. The police don't care nearly as much about drug offences as here. We are absolutely obsessed with drug offences here. It's just it's a policing choice. The police budget in New South Wales is one number. I forget what the number is. Let's make it up. $6 billion. How they spend that money is up to them. They could spend it all on sexual assault. They could spend it all on child sex offences. They could spend it all on domestic violence. They could spend it all on whatever they like, environmental safety. But they choose to spend such a huge bulk of it. You know, the whole time I was a magistrate, I never once saw a search warrant for a domestic violence offence. Never once. Thousands upon thousands of drug search warrants. You know, like, whose priorities are those? You know, if you get a chance to see Nearly Normal Nimbin, there is an absolutely beautiful scene outside the police station here, leading up to the first Mardi Gras, where Bob Hopkins is, or Prohibition End as his name was then, is trying to get into the police station with a joint, and the camera flashes to a woman who says, my daughter was sexually abused and I made a complaint to the police station 6 months ago and they still haven't followed up on it. And there are all these helicopters out there busting plants. And she makes that point. The same point is true now. You know, I feel like holding up a poster saying, how much longer do we have to keep fighting this shit for? Yep.
Yeah, hi, David. Firstly, it's weird being in front of you without being in the courtroom.
I'm sorry. Sorry if I was mean.
Thanks. No, you weren't being mean. You actually, the last time I was in front of you, you actually were very, very helpful, and you extended the period of time that I was able to keep my licence to get medical treatment. Now, basically, just very quickly, 2010, Byron Bay, tested negative first test, tested negative second test, lost my licence for 6 months. Then I tested positive once to a highway patrol car between Lismore and Nimbin, and I told him that I had missing a part of my spine, I got sciatica and I didn't want to use opioids, and he let me go. Otherwise, all the other times have actually been RDT locations, and including last year in February where I lost my licence on Monday. And unfortunately 4 weeks ago at Gilmangar, 5 weeks ago, I tested positive again. Now, I've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I don't want to get into that too much, but I've also got spinal injuries, and I basically depend on cannabis to function as a human being. And when I last was in front of you, I tried for a Section 32, and you entertained the idea of listening to what I had to say, and I'm wondering if you could give me some advice so I could, moving forward, may well be able to do a successful defence and set a precedent.
Yeah, I can, and there. It's a real answer that I want to give. Have we got 3 minutes? Okay. So I would like to answer it this way. I talked before about the defence of necessity. That is, classically, I gave the example of someone driving to the hospital. Their partner giving birth, they went through a red light. About 20 years ago, a woman called Georgina Rayner and I wrote an article about necessity and drug law, and I think that your case is an example. It is necessary for you to have this drug. This is not your drug of choice, as it were. This is what you need to survive on a day-to-day level. And I think we've reached the point where there's enough medical evidence to show that for some people that is true, that the alternatives are not as good, they're not as effective, or not effective at all. Abortion was illegal in New South Wales until very recently. But the defence of necessity, a judge said, well, if it's for the physical or mental well-being of the woman, then there is no crime. And that worked. That defence worked in New South Wales, indeed all around Australia, for decades. Why can't the same defence work for people charged with the heinous crime of possession or drug driving, where there's no danger to the community? And I think it could. But the real strategy has to be legal change. That's one strategy, and I think it's worth pursuing. But the real strategy has to be legal change. Look, when I started in practice, I represented homosexuals. I represented abortionists. I represented prostitutes. I represented SP bookmakers. Those of you who are old enough to know what that means will know what that means. All of those 4 crimes now, which used to occupy 30, 40% of the magistrates' court are now gone, and the sky has not fallen in. Yet there's one more victimless crime to go, just one, and that is drug law reform and drug driving law reform. And it's the last one of these victimless crimes that is still in place. How did all those others go by the by? Well, the answer is public agitation. I mean, not only is homosexuality not illegal, we now have gay marriage. Not only is SP bookmaking not illegal, you can gamble on everything and anything now. Abortion hasn't been effectively illegal for, it's been actually legal now for a few years, and before then was common law legal. What was the last category? That'll do. Suffice to say that we need legislative change on drug driving and drug law reform. And that's really the way. You might win one case on necessity, yours sounds strong, but to change the whole thing, to change the whole pattern, needs legislative change.
I just wanted to offer a little chink in the armour. The Victorian Commissioner of Police came out at the end of last year saying he totally agreed with you, more or less. They, in fact, have been to Portugal to study how Portugal has decriminalised drugs. So I just thought I'd put that into the
I'm well aware of that.
Good.
And yet the police are the main barrier to Fiona Patton's change to make prescription exception to the drug driving laws.
In Victoria?
In Victoria. That's
How come
Fiona
he can
Patton
say
from the
that?
Reason Party. Is she coming up to Mardi Gras? She can speak on it.
But he came out and said that.
Yeah.
That they were looking into the...
It's, I find it the same when they start talking about their huge emphasis on domestic violence, and I would sit there in my court list and, you know, there'd be 30, 40, 50 possession cannabis charges in a week, and I'd think, well, where's, you know, you talk the talk, it's a matter of walking the walk. And, you know, the Portugal argument is insurmountable. I mean, I was just reading this morning that the rate of youth use of cannabis, young people's use of cannabis, has decreased massively. You know, like, there's no argument. But yes, I take the point. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I know you've spoken about England and their laws. If you had a prescription from England and turned up in Australia, does the same apply?
The question was, if you had a prescription from England and you turned up to Australia, does it apply? I think perhaps the same question could be asked of Tasmania, because it's the same. And in both cases, the answer is no. If you had a prescription from Tasmania, or you had a prescription from England, or you had a prescription from New South Wales, or all three, it's still not a defence. Sorry.
Yes, you were saying that CBD can have 1% THC. Will that be all CBD over the counter?
No, they are allowing CBD to have up to 1%. Now, I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you can get from your doctor 100% pure CBD without THC in it. Is that correct? So you can do that, and if you do that, you're going to do two things. Firstly, you're going to avoid a positive test, which is great. But secondly, you may not be getting the best medical treatment for your condition because of all of that stuff that was so beautifully said by the doctors about, you know, effectively what I call, in non-medical terms, whole plant.
Thank you for this fascinating talk. Can you talk a little bit more about political will? You talk about the things that are stacked up against it, but are there people in New South Wales state government who are actively working for some remediation of this silliness?
Can I say that I blame, yes, there are people talking about it. There are some backbench members of the Labor Party. Rose Jackson from the upper house of New South Wales, very big on drug law reform. The Greens have been leading the charge on this for some time. yes, Mike Baird was for quite a while connected to Lucy Haslam and her medicinal cannabis stuff, but he's sort of dropped out of the picture, probably because he's a banker. He doesn't seem to be speaking about it. Of course, there's ex-ministers and ex-politicians who are speaking about it. I notice Andrew Robb, Liberal, is very much in favour of, he's an ambassador like I am and like others here are of Mind Medicine Australia, and that's all very good. But I do think that we have no opposition here in terms of the Labor Party in New South Wales to our current drug laws. They are the front bench, the leader, the Shadow Minister for Health, the Shadow Minister of Justice, the Shadow Attorney General, the Shadow Police Minister, are utterly and completely silent on it. Worse than that, when the government was about to make these minuscule changes as a result of the ICE inquiry, the only Labor person who spoke was Christine Keneally, who's a New South Wales senator who went on 2GB and said, these changes are appalling, all drugs are bad, blah, 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 blah. I'm putting words in her mouth. But that's effectively what she said. They shouldn't change it. How dare they, etc. So I do think that if we've got a progressive left-wing alternative government, if they would only be progressive, left-wing and alternative, we might get a little bit further towards the picture. We don't expect the Conservatives to be anything other than conservative. I mean, that's what they are. It's okay. But I sort of expect more of the progressive left, if there is such a thing in the Labor Party.
Any more questions? I think we're winding down by the looks of it.
One more over here.
Hang on.
So if you wanted just to go home today and do one thing that could help change, reform laws, what would you like us to do?
I think if you could do one thing, it would be to go and visit, not write, but go and make an appointment to see your local member and tell them your story. If you're a medicinal cannabis user, tell them your story. That's what I would say is the most important thing to do. Also, if you are interested, the Drive Change campaign is bringing in a lot of people. We're speaking to parliamentarians, right around the country. We're speaking to politicians and trying to get movement on this in a very narrow sphere, which is those who are on prescription. So go to that website. But seriously, go and see your local member. They're not heartless, and I think it's an insurmountable argument in favour of that minor change. I mean, how can anyone argue against it?
So that's for New South Wales?
Yep, every state, right across the board. Yep. So, thank you very much.
I think you stay here. Just stay here.
Oh, okay.
So, Doc, come up. I think we'll just keep David here. And my idea was Dr. John will come back up. Jamie's doing a Zoom call, but will come back. And we leave these guys up here and continue the conversation, and you ask questions. I had a couple of thoughts. Now I'm up here, I get a chance. I want everyone to be seated because I'm going to say something. I don't want you to be shocked. I want to say something a bit supportive of the police, which is most unusual for me. The police are clearly using some discretion in New South Wales on cannabis. And that did come from Mike Baird originally. I think he instructed them to. And I'm just dreaming, but maybe the police have started to back off on saliva testing too. Corona's been an excuse for them. They don't want to go near any saliva. But I think that your persistent talking and the nagging, and local police know full well the damage it does taking people's licence away. I think they've got a bit shy about doing it. They certainly haven't been testing here lately. And I just should slip you a couple of things. All the hippies around here carry fishermen's friends on their dashboard. It's no guarantee, but if you're pulled up by the police and you quickly have a couple of them, the rumour is you won't test positive. And I think it's the same for a milky coffee. You should clean your teeth really well. They are after residue in your mouth, and you can mess up their first test. Now, there's no guarantees, but, you know, people take precautions. And I'm just going to leave you guys here, and you keep asking questions.
Yes. Yep. David.
You know, it's the second time I've been asked that today, and a really lovely question, because being outspoken it can have really serious impacts. Particularly if, like me, you've had your traumas with PTSD, it triggers, you tend to be hypervigilant, and yes, perhaps a bit paranoid. When I was a magistrate, the attacks on me were relentless. From death threats to police leaking to the media to picking on members of my family, and if ever they got in trouble, making sure that they were big time in the newspaper. For that reason, I don't participate in any illicit drugs that could be tested. I would love to. One of my thoughts when I stopped being a magistrate was, you know, yee-haw, here I come, back to Nimbin in every way possible. No, but then when I realised that I was going to be speaking out on this cause, I realised I just can't afford to. I've been tested now 7 times in 18 months.
That's not random.
And it may be random. And I'm particularly cautious at Gulmingar. I mean, what is it with Gulmingar? I even drive by the Shannon just to keep away from Gulmingar. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. Okay, so the question is... Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, the Speaker said that he's heard that in Victoria they're going to adopt changes to the drug driving legislation for the introduction of CBD and more medicinal use. And secondly, same in New South Wales has agreed to adopt it. David Shoebridge put up a very minor amendment towards the end of last year, which Labor and Liberals opposed, enabling, and they said a whole range of, the Liberal Party in particular, spokesperson, put up some spurious arguments against. Victoria, I think it's touch and go as to whether Fiona Patton's bill is going to get up. We will know in the next couple of months. You know, I sincerely hope so. It would bring me nothing but joy. But I think it's a bit like getting a park out there in the main street today. You know, I'm hopeful but pessimistic. I'd like to ask John a question.
Yes, please.
Is it just garbage what I said about the shelving, is that the right term? The cannabis oil, that's suppository.
Well, yes, it is true. So they've done some studies down in Australia last year. There was a lot of work done on impairment, method of administration of cannabis and driving by the Lambert Initiative, which is a philanthropic pro-cannabis scientific organisation based in New South Wales. And method of administration, the first thing was time from dose. So 5 minutes later you're in trouble. 12 hours later, a lot less chance, and it's not a straight curve, it gets down quicker. So time is the most important thing. Method of administration then is probably the next most important thing. So if you inhale cannabis either through vaporisation or smoking, it's essentially a gas in your mouth, and that will more likely penetrate your tongue. So high probability of detection, especially shortly after smoking or vaporising. If you use oils only but don't smoke or vaporise, the chance of detection that was done from this study dropped down significantly, like 90% less. And if you only use capsules and you don't burp, as you mentioned, there's a few factors, but if you only use encapsulated cannabis, even high THC cannabis, the chances of detection were basically zero on the mouth swab. You will test positive on a blood swab, a blood test. You will test positive on a urine screen and probably a hair screen as well. And that would go for suppositories as well. So if it doesn't touch your mouth, the doctor you're referring to was correct, I believe as well, that it's unlikely that if you have a high dose of THC in your blood, it's going to backflow to your mouth. That's unlikely, very unlikely. So yeah, the studies indicated that even with high THC in those encapsulated situations, it was basically 0% detection on the swab. Yes?
Just a very brief point. The saliva detection of saliva, I mean, they really do make you ram it in your mouth for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Now, the question is, if you've got gum disease and you're picking up blood, is that considered saliva?
Oh, I don't know about the law on that, but it'd be a good question. I suppose there's...
Sorry, the question is whether if you've got sores in your mouth, they're actually detecting saliva or they're detecting blood. It doesn't matter, unfortunately.
So it probably could be more likely to detect it, I suppose, if there was blood coming in there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Delta 8 and mouth swabs. I don't know what Delta 8 is.
Delta 8 THC is different molecular variation of THC. So Delta 9 THC is your standard THC. Delta 8 THC is still a form of THC. I'm not sure, and I couldn't say whether they actually test for Delta 8 THC. I'm not sure. Do you know the exact molecule that is tested for?
The legislation just says THC.
So the molecular shape is very, very similar. So I would say probably yes, it will be detected, but I'm not 100% certain. In the front row? Yeah, so the question is, when you treat a cancer patient for their symptoms, are there any positives in terms of life expectancy and cancer progression? I would say anecdotally, yes. You can treat within, it depends on how you apply for the approval, but you can definitely get up to what would be considered, from real world experience, a therapeutic dose for treating cancer, as it were. There's no caveat, there's no cure for cancer, but anecdotally around the world, a lot of people do use high dose THC and CBD and reportedly get benefit or remission from that cancer. In my clinic, I've definitely seen patients that have had remission of their cancer, whether that was from the THC or the combination of dietary regime plus cannabinoids. It's impossible to tell. But anecdotally, my answer would be a yes to that. I have seen positive results for cancer out of the patients in Australia that I've treated, for sure.
And in Australia, with those results, have you seen patients take up to 1,000 milligrams a day?
So the question is, in Australia, do people take up to 1,000 milligrams a day for cancer? I have patients that have come to me self-medicating and definitely doing that, 100%. That 1,000 milligrams a day is referring to Rick Simpson method. So Rick Simpson's not a doctor, he's a person in America who started advocating for cannabis and cancer use. Essentially said, make up your own alcohol extraction using your rice cooker and take 1 gram of that a day for 30 days, see how you're going, repeat as necessary. That's the Rick Simpson's method. So from my experience, from my colleagues in the States who have been doing this in a more open area for a longer, up to 2 decades in some situations, that does seem to be a bit of an overkill. excessive and more than you need to, on average, help with cancer. So that's also talking about mixed cannabinoids, so a balance of CBD and THC. So generally, if people are wanting to do that, I will get their approval for symptomatic relief, but you can get up to adequate dosing ranges within the allowable amounts that the government will approve. So I would have an aim somewhere about 250 milligrams of mixed cannabinoids to 350 milligrams. That's plenty. If anyone in this room, except maybe the most seasoned people, had that amount of cannabis in one go, you'd be asleep for a few days. But if you build up slowly to that amount, you can actually function very well, and that's the secret to that. So generally, it's too expensive to do 1,000 milligrams a day unless you are growing your own cannabis. And growing your own cannabis, it's like tomatoes. That's not always that easy to get a nice big fat tomato. So in this environment in Australia, 1,000 milligrams a day, you'd be looking at probably $30,000 to $35,000 a year on medicine expenses. So that's a lot more than most people can afford. So my aim is that it's a bit lower, but still high. Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. The question was, is THC of medical benefit? THCA. So I don't know if everyone was here earlier, but when you heat up cannabis, you take off the A and it becomes activated or decarboxylated. So THCA is essentially raw cannabis, the raw THC. You also have CBDA and all the other cannabinoids with an A on them. And that essentially means that's how the plant's grown them without any heat. So medically, generally all the medicines that I've got available are activated or decarboxylated, so you'll get a high effect from them if you have enough. They can fit into the receptors and directly connect with your cannabinoid receptors. The THCA, it doesn't matter how much you have, you're not going to get a high effect. The shape of the A sort of precludes it from binding directly to the cannabis receptors. Saying that, there's definitely health benefits to be had from THCA, raw cannabinoids, and the data and evidence is a little lacking, I suppose, but a lot of people do use raw THCA. There's talk of children with epilepsy and ASD getting benefit from THCA. In the legal market, it's not readily available. It's just not. I don't know why. That raw cannabis, it is available here in Nimbin, and I know a lot of patients do use it to good effect. So I would say yes, there's just good generalised health benefits from THCA. And you could get THCA through juicing cannabis leaves of any sort. It doesn't even have to be really high quality. You'd still be getting thousands of milligrams of THCA there. Great health benefits. Morgan, her name is, she's a bit of an advocate, and she has Crohn's disease, which is a gut issue, and she's talked at Nimbin Medicans before and Mardi Gras, and she's a bit of an advocate for cannabis. Her father got in trouble with the law for growing her cannabis plants, which she would juice and drink. So she wasn't smoking it, she wasn't getting high, it was helping her. He got in trouble, had to stop growing those plants. Her disease flared very badly to the point where she was looking down the barrel of having her bowel chopped out, large section of her intestines removed. Of course, she didn't want that to happen, and then she was lucky enough to stumble onto this community where she went and stayed with someone who had a legalised hemp growing and simply juiced cannabis for a few months, stayed there on the property and juiced that cannabis daily. And I've talked to her. She's a fit and healthy young lady. She still uses CBD oils and THC oils, which she's getting legally now. But definitely that had a massive result for her. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for raw cannabis and THCA, and they're definitely beneficial for your body. They're good to ingest. I maybe put them more in a really good health supplement area. So generally as medicines, we use decarboxylated and activated medications, but if you've got the option to do that, it's a good thing to do for your body.
I wanted to add to that if you leave THCA in the glove box when you're a fly-in, fly-out worker at Ballina Airport and it gets hot...
That's decarboxylation.
Then you get busted by the drug driving. But the THCA doesn't trigger the test, but don't leave it in the glove box.
Yeah.
This poor fly-in, fly-out guy, comes back and says, this is impossible. Like I've been told it's THCA. All I did was juice plants. And yes, that's how the story came. Yeah, good. We're on the same wavelength.
So he had an honest and reasonable defence.
Well, did he have an honest and reasonable defence? Yes, he did. And I should say in that case, the police actually withdrew the charges. So, yes.
So the swab is, as far as I know, is just like a cotton bud, and they're looking. They just scrape it in your mouth. They're getting the little cells. Your tongue and cheeks will give off cells and saliva, and they're testing for any trace of THC in those cells or saliva. I think it's just like a little blue line, like a pregnancy test, actually. So you swirl it around your mouth, and they set it aside for 10 minutes, and then it diffuses up through the chemicals. And if THC is present, a little blue line comes out like a baby. So you've got to be careful not to confuse those two.
You do. And can you refuse it was the other part of that question. I mean, of course you can, but it is highly inadvisable. The maximum penalty, well, the effective penalty for a first offence drug driving is 3 months disqualification and a fine. The effective penalty for refusing a swab is up to 3 years. So it is highly inadvisable to refuse the swab. Somebody near and dear to me, back in the early days of swabbing, the police used to put it in the mouth themselves and swished around. And this person sitting next to me said, "You are not putting that in my mouth." And they gave it to her to do herself. And now they always do that, I think. In Queensland?
Well, I mean, I was just asked to swap it
Yeah,
in the mouth.
you do it yourself. But short answer is don't refuse, is the legal advice. I mean, unless you're prepared for the consequences.
And then you're given your sample, you're given a second test, and they put it also through a Draco machine.
Yeah.
So it's quite
So you're saying that there's no THC in some CBD oil?
If to the best of my knowledge, you can answer that.
Yeah, so the question was, is there some CBD oils with no THC? The answer is yes. Generally, they are being purified or isolated. When the cannabis plant grows, some are high in CBD genetically and low in THC. Others are high in THC and low in CBD. Some are balanced. That's mainly because of the way that with Prohibition, people have wanted the highest possible THC because they wanted to feel high, stoned. So the breeding's gone that way. The breeding's come back the other way now because of the medical industry and medicinal cannabis, so there's lots of high CBD strains. But generally if you have a whole plant medicine, there'll be a small amount at least of THC in that medication. I haven't heard of a CBD oil which has 0% THC naturally, so they'll have been extracted essentially. And it's true that whole plant medicines, full spectrum medicines, are more effective. So that small amount of THC and the other cannabinoids, minor cannabinoids and terpenes are going to be beneficial as well. But that you can get 0% THC CBDs, and they're called isolates. So they've been isolated in the lab. So they'll get a standard plant and take out the THC and hopefully leave everything else. But sometimes you can just extract pure CBD molecules, and you can get pure CBD powder, which is called an isolate. Next.
Just a comment. Don't these drug laws encourage people to drive without a licence?
The question was, don't these drug laws tempt people to drive without a licence, or at least take the risk? And the answer is, the penalty, of course, yes. Worse still, what they tend to do, just for example, a recent study was done of, if you're charged with possession of cannabis, if you're caught with cannabis, there is a cautioning system. Recent study from the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research showed that Mossman, Bellevue Hill, etc., really high rates of cautioning. Moree, Burke, Tabulum, Casino, really low rates of cautioning. So what you get is a targeting of drug driving in low socioeconomic areas, and then people lose their licence and then they drive while disqualified. Driving while disqualified carries a jail term. So what you then get is this catastrophic escalation of offending conduct, which leads to a whole range of things. Drive while disqualified, imprisonment. We all know that if you go to jail once, your chances of going back in the next 5 years is well over 50%. Not only that, but if young men, characterising this, are driving without a licence because they've lost it, that's where you get the bad police chases. That's where you get deaths. That's where you get all of that harm, all as a result of some pissy no-harm offence. Pardon me.
And on that note, if I take CBD oil, which I buy over the counter in Lismore at night, treat the joints or maybe and drive to work the next day, am I at risk of bad
if you're buying CBD over the counter in Lismore, I don't think it will be. As far as I know, there's no legally available CBD over the counter yet, although the laws have changed, so it may not be legal. But if that CBD does have any THC in it, then you're at risk of testing positive. The risk is low if you don't smoke cannabis, which I don't know if you do or not. And if it's only a very small amount of THC, your risk is lower again. And if it's oils, your risk is lower again than vaporising. So the answer is yes, you are putting yourself at a little bit of risk, but we don't know what's in that CBD. If that CBD is no THC CBD, there's no risk. And there's definitely no risk of impairment. Yes, sister.
Okay, quick question. In your professional experience, have you come across a huge amount of people who are hemp farmers who have had contact contamination unknowingly comes up in a test?
No is the short answer. I've had very few, because my experience is, and this is really going to shock you, a lot of hemp farmers also smoke.
Oh.
I'm sorry to say, it reminds me very much in the 1980s, I went down to Tasmania. Tasmania is the biggest grower of opium poppies in the Southern Hemisphere. They have a massive poppy industry there. And I met a farmer there, and I was looking around his poppy farm, and I said, do you ever get, sort of tempted? And he goes, oh no, don't be stupid, except, see that bottle of whiskey there? And he had a bottle of whiskey that was 1/3 poppy seeds. And he said, if anyone in the family gets sick, we find this really effective. And I'm thinking, go hard. That is the same as hemp farmers in my experience. So yes, people have come before me with two kinds of contamination. One is if they're in a small enclosed space, and the other was a particular woman, several of them, but one particular woman stands out who was a carer and who was cleaning the implements, cleaning the bongs, doing all of that stuff for someone who was dying. And there was probably oral contamination. But there are also people who would come before the court, particularly amphetamines, who would just have absolutely no idea how it got into their system. Like, I've never done amphetamines in my life. But some of them were smokers. And it occurred to me that, there was some spicing up going on that would then lead to amphetamine contamination. But also, I can't remember the stat, I'm probably wrong, but something like 10% of all $100 notes in America will test positive to cocaine. the testing is getting really, really good and really fine. So, you know, it's a problem area.
So not a defence. Not a defence.
It may be a defence if you can show that you had no honest or reasonable view that you had any THC in your system, which is a bit harder if you're a grower and a smoker. Gerald? Yes. Yes. That is a study of one. I don't know, but the law says that any species of the genus cannabis is unlawful. So if it is of that plant family, I'm not a biologist, then you're buggered.
So the comment there is if I take CBD regularly, you know, it does actually, THC can be detected. The question was a comment really that, you know, this man was taking CBD oil, which had a small amount of THC in there, less than 1% by weight, but consistently taking that medication over time resulted in a positive blood test, positive saliva test. So there's the answer to that. Yes, there is a risk there. THC is a fat-soluble molecule, which means that when you take it, it can get into your body, it can get into your brain and your nerves and work as a medicine. But it also means that after 8 hours, when you're not going to have any impairment or effect or high feeling from that THC, it will remain in your body. And if you take it steadily every day, which is the best way to take cannabis medicines, your body will eventually reach a balance point and have a lot of THC stored in it, although it's not active. And if you're someone that's been using cannabis medicinally or recreationally for 10 or 20 or 30 years, the time for that cannabis to completely exit your body can be 2 weeks, it can be 4 weeks, it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months down the track. If you lose a bit of weight because you go on a diet, you'll have a spike of THC in your blood. So it takes a long time to get out of your body, and it doesn't get out if you're consistently taking it every day.
Just a quick comment. We've got over 60 viewers on Facebook watching us live. I'd like to acknowledge them.
Thank you.
Speak loud so that the world can hear.
Thanks for listening in on Facebook, everyone. I don't think it would make much difference. The question was, does weight make any difference to detection? It's of THC in your body, if you're taking a CBD oil which contains some THC. I don't think so. I don't think it does make any difference. I think it's such a low level, as Dave was saying, that it's minuscule. And THC, unlike alcohol, I think, well, alcohol is similar, but unlike a lot of drugs, is not directly related to size. So you can have a big man that is very sensitive to THC, and you can have a tiny old lady that soaks it up like a sponge. So it's very personal in that sense. Michael?
Has there been any trials done, or if not, your own opinion, on the efficacy difference between isolates and whole plant?
Yeah, the question was, is there any difference in effectiveness or efficacy of cannabis as a medicine between isolates, which is just the CBD or the THC molecule, and whole plant, which is all those other entourage molecules? My opinion and the science confirm each other in that sense. So there have been some studies done on, I know mainly about CBD, comparing a CBD isolate to a full spectrum CBD, and the dosing required to get the same clinical response was 4 to 5 times the required amount. So generally, with isolates, they are less effective. You need to dose more heavily. And the funny thing is, isolates are more expensive because they have more work done to them to get them isolated. So that's the same as encapsulated medicines. The amount of work that the company has to do reflected in the cost. So isolates cost more than full spectrum products.
Yeah, look, I've got a question on terpenes. You were talking about those earlier, John, about you know, the different chemicals that are in plant products, molecules, excuse me. Often talked a lot, turmeric is often talked about a lot, and pepperine you're talking also about. Do they need to be heated when they're put together synergistically, or are they just as beneficial when you put them together, you know, without heating?
It's a very good question. The question was, does turmeric and pepper need to be heated to be effective? And that's funny you should say that, because I've got a big interest in turmeric myself. The answer is heating is detrimental to the medical effects of turmeric. So when you heat up turmeric, the active ingredient curcumin, and like cannabis, there's multiple curcumins and multiple other things in turmeric as well. So if you're buying a turmeric, the same rules as cannabis apply. Don't get an isolated curcumin, get a concentrated or a whole plant extract. So if you heat up curcumin or turmeric, which you do, say, in the powdering process, or if you boil it for tea, you'll actually break down the active ingredient, which is curcumin. Black pepper does contain beta-caryophyllene, but that's not the main reason it's used in turmeric. Studies on turmeric initially that promote that black pepper were done on isolates. So when they isolated the curcumin, they found that you could take really big doses and you weren't getting very good plasma levels. So then it was found out that if you added black pepper, you would get better plasma levels from that turmeric. The thing is, with turmeric, if you actually don't extract the curcumin, it's actually got really good absorptive potential. It absorbs really well in your body, because if you ever reduce turmeric, you'll know that it's oily and you get a sticky, oily orange colour everywhere in your kitchen. But that oil makes the curcumin fat soluble. So when they isolated that curcumin, it became not fat soluble. So that's the reason that people always say black pepper is so important. I don't think it's 100% necessary if you've got a fresh juiced turmeric, for instance, but often it's put in. I put it in my particular turmeric product for completeness. It's also got your beta-caryophyllene, it's got your piperine in there as well, which are all excellent things for your body. And pepper on its own, it's the reason we take it. It's very good for us. So the answer to that question is no, you shouldn't heat your turmeric to get best absorptive results. And black pepper is useful if it's an isolate. It's not going to harm you, and you may as well put it in, but I don't think it makes a large amount of difference to your blood plasma levels of curcumin.
Can I say something on that? Because I've been making herbal medicines with with turmeric and peppercorn and CBD, dominant hemp, for quite a few years now. And when I got into it, I started looking into all the phytocannabinoids that were out there, not just ones that I'd heard of, like peppercorn with turmeric. And basically, what I learnt was that the beta-carotene, which is BCP for short, from the black peppercorn, which is ideal, has to be freshly grounded to get it richest while it's still got its acids on it. And with that, you don't want to cook it to extreme heats, but you do want to heat it because that actually infuses it and gets it to that ability to be up to 1,000 times more effective, which is what they believe it can be, up to 2,000 if done in laboratory conditions with the exact ratios. And basically they stumbled on it because they weren't selling any bowel and colon cancer medications to India and the Middle East, where turmeric and peppercorn was greatly consumed. So I actually, basically, when I talk to people, I just basically tell them that I add turmeric, ginger and peppercorn for the values that they have, and that I always use freshly grounded black peppercorn. I don't use anything out of a packet or anything because it evaporates. It decarboxylates at such a fast rate, you've got to capture it really quickly for it to be effective. That's my experience. And also the other, when you're talking about isolates, I've got CBG isolate at home and I've actually consumed it, and it's basically knocks me out, which is kind of strange because I get about 25 minutes of really nice euphoric feeling and then I just basically zonk. And when that can be very handy, so I save it for emergency occasions. But I find that for me to have that, if I have my honey prior to having it, it has a greater effect because it opens up all the receptors because it's got all the other phytocannabinoids in there. So the entourage effect of those cannabinoids, they do really play a role. We call them terpenes or flavonoids, but they all just are basically, in principle, cannabinoids, and they all have an active role to play.
Exactly right. You know, we're just talking about terpenes again there, and isolates versus the whole plant. And yeah, they're all very important, and that is the entourage effect. That is what whole plant medicine is. So it is very important, I believe, to have that whole plant medicine. So thanks for that comment.
There was just a brief comment from Facebook saying how to use turmeric, but...
how to use turmeric?
The turmeric and the pepper.
Yeah, so turmeric has been shown to increase endocannabinoid production in our bodies, so it increases our own natural levels of cannabinoids. Turmeric should be used in a small amount regularly. So we have just sort of a straight cold pressed turmeric, ginger, honey, cinnamon, black pepper mixture, and we say take 20-25 mils twice a day. So it's regularity with all these things, cannabinoid medicines, plant medicines. Having a bigger amount in one go is not necessarily going to benefit you, but it's that regular support of your system and that regular input of any plant medicine, I think, which is very important in getting a great clinical result. If you take things intermittently, you don't get those results. Turmeric, honey, turmeric, ginger, honey, cinnamon, and black pepper is what it is. Yeah. Into creamed honey, yeah, that'd be lovely. Yes.
I have iatrogenic autoimmune conditions, including nephrotic syndrome and inflammatory kind of things, and permanent brain inflammation, shingles, and so on. What do you recommend that I should do? Because in most of the conditions that I have, there is no orthodox treatment that's safe.
Yeah, so the question was, what do I do for a medicinal caused inflammatory autoimmune condition? So with anything that causes an autoimmune condition, there's some sort of triggering initial episode or compound that is going to cause an overt inflammatory response. Yes? Okay, so this was a new medicine which was being trialled, and it's obviously did cause an inflammatory response, and a big one. And when your body does that, there's a lot of it at the moment talking about COVID with what they call the cytokine storm. So your body senses there's something wrong, and it makes antibodies to everything that's there at the moment, and that might be your muscles or your tendon tissues or your brain or your nervous tissues. And from then on, your body sees them as other, sees them as something that needs to be fixed up, that needs to be gotten rid of. But obviously, if you're trying to get rid of your nerves, it's going to cause a big problem. So in the conventional medical landscape, they would have given you, and I'm sure they still try to give you, lots and lots of steroids, prednisone, and that sort of thing to dampen the immune response. The next step will be to give you some sort of chemotherapeutic agents which essentially immunosuppress you. So things like methotrexate would be another thing that may have been offered to you. And those things are essentially suppressing your own immune system so that you don't get that excess inflammation to yourself. So whatever the cause of that initial trigger, you get these immune attack upon yourself. CBD would be the first place to start in fairly high dosing, a little bit more than you would use, let's just say, to balance your THC use. CBD's got that excellent anti-inflammatory effect and is going to promote the strengthening of particularly the inflammatory and immune response receptors on your body, and then your body will be able to down-regulate that better. You'd probably also be using THC for associated pain, for instance, or sleep issues or anything else that's going along, but that wouldn't be your mainstay. You'd be looking at a fair bit of CBD, a moderate amount of THC. Oral would be fine for longer duration to help reduce that inflammatory response. Then I would also add in other anti-inflammatories, natural ones, so turmeric, curcumin, copaiba oil, beta-caryophyllene, the terpene. You can get that as an essential and use them as well. Anything that's going to lower inflammation in your body but not give you a detrimental effect. So I have a lot of patients, what you're describing can be caused by many, many things. And people call it fibromyalgia, some people call it MS. There's a lot of different diseases, as it were, that are basically the same sort of thing, an over-inflammatory response against some part of yourself. So the cannabinoid system wants to bring everything back into balance. Your body knows you're inflamed, but it's accidentally doing it to itself. So supporting that system to help bring that balance back is a very, very wise thing to do. So in short, CBD oil, THC oil, turmeric, other anti-inflammatories such as copaiba. Cut out any inflammatory agents from your body. So looking at what you eat, cutting out any herbicide and pesticide contaminated foods, which is all standard wheat, cereals, sugar, potatoes. Getting a clean diet free of chemicals because you've already got a lot of inflammation to deal with, and maximising that endocannabinoid system as well. So that will be a brief synopsis of how I deal with that.
I found stress is one of the biggest factors for both lowering the immune system and bringing on the autoimmune problems, and it's the drug testing that's really stressed me out.
Yes.
And that's why things are coming back.
So the comment there was stress seems to worsen this man's condition. And that's 100% true. You know, stress from whatever, be it physical or mental or emotional stress, will release adrenaline and cortisol in your body. Those things will heighten your inflammatory response, will promote extracting blood sugars from your body so that you've got energy to run and fight. So stress is inducing inflammation in your body. So initially, it will help reduce it. But then in the long term, if you've got chronic stress, it's going to deplete you and worsen that inflammatory response.
Yeah, I think the comment was also the drug driving testing is causing the stress. And it really, it's a spiral. One of the most criminal things about this stupidity is that it causes stress to people who can least afford it. I don't just mean financially, I mean stress-wise. And hence the begging. You know, the begging in court. You know, people cannot live without their licence and struggle to live with every time they're driving looking over their shoulder. It's just, it's appalling.
And that stress thing is so relevant. Plenty of my patients have commented to me that before they've taken their oils, their anxiety is reduced, and it's purely because of that reason. They've spent their whole life feeling criminalised, being worried about getting tested when they go to the shops or drop off their kids if they're taking a CBD oil. And that's actually, you know, causing them more stress. And just by you know, that's one of the reasons I think just entering the legalised system, you get that little bit of paperwork, which in itself, although it won't cover driving, helps alleviate a lot of stress from people's lives, because you can't get in trouble for possession. You can't get in trouble for travelling or moving around. You can for driving, but for everything else, there's a lot of stress lifted from that person.
And also, what's strong, your link to that stress is that fear cascade, which was spoken about earlier on by the other speaker there, which we don't realise how often, how powerful it is, the psychic effects. It wasn't my original question. I was going to ask you about, you mentioned Copaiba, which I've found just amazing for dealing with inflammation. When someone suggested this to me a while ago, I thought, oh, it's going to be horribly bitter and it's going to be really unpleasant. But actually it's very mild, and I would really put my hand up personally for the use of copaiba oil. I think it's very powerful and very useful. Perhaps you could speak to that a little bit, John.
Definitely. So I'll repeat the question. The question is, this gentleman's found copaiba or copaiba oil very beneficial for inflammation in his body. And that's my favourite terpene, it's a beta-caryophyllene. The copaiba plant is a plant which is grown in South America, and it's used as a herbal medicine over there and has been for many, many years. So the essential oil of that plant, the particular one we have, is 48% pure beta-caryophyllene. So copaiba is just a plant, an essential oil extract. It's available across the road in the apothecary. So
there's a question right up the back there.
It's C-O-P-A-I-B-A. Yeah. So copaiba oil is high in beta-caryophyllene. Yes, it is good for inflammation. Question up the back there.
The question is, it's a good question. Do you have the right to deny the swab test and go straight to the secondary test? The short, with blood samples, they actually give you a sample. If you have blood test, they give you a sample so you can get it tested, but they don't with the swabs, and it's not part of the procedure. Secondly, can you refuse the first part of the test and then go straight to the second? The first test by the roadside, not complying with that, is an offence in itself, but it's less penalty than the second one. But again, inadvisable. And the reason is because the Dragar test it probably catches more than the first test, even though the first test is unreliable. So it's a little bit of damned if you do and damned if you don't, but you will get charged with failing to comply with the first test. If you happen to have a medical reason for not complying with the first test, then maybe you can run a defence to that, but I've yet to see one. Short answer, refuse the first test. The question is, the questioner suffers from a range of medical conditions that makes it impossible or difficult for her to remove her mask without having an adverse medical reaction to that. Yes, that could provide a defence. I've yet to see it run, and it'd be risky, but it's possible, and I'd be happy to help you if that occurs.
No, that is a compound which helps absorption of other drugs into your body. It's a adjuvant, they call it, an addition to a lot of medications that facilitate better absorption through your the membranes of your body.
I reckon you got one. This is going to be the last question. Speak up.
Yeah, the question is there any simple method that a person can use themselves to, like the alkalizer at the club or the pub where you can blow into and get a reading of alcohol, is there any similar test for people to use to assess whether they're going to test positive to THC? No. There is no simple test that you can use. Well, if you have access to a Dragar machine, then you could use that. But you need a machine, and I think they're about $18,000 each. So I would think that it's going to, even the Nimbin Bolo might not put one in quickly. But the short answer is no, there is none. It's a great idea. I mean, wouldn't it be good if you could take a swab and do your own pregnancy type test and see whether you're going to test positive or not? The problem is, of course, that with cannabis, as alcohol has variables, so there's a time period, but my understanding is it's an even more extreme time-sensitive period with the swab testing. So if you get in your car and you test positive when you leave Lismore, negative when you leave Lismore, and you get to Nimbin and you test it again, then there's risks because of the variability of the levels. So,
I reckon we might wind it up. And I'm remiss that I should have two, with Jamie's here, 3 big bunches of flowers to give you guys. Seriously, because, you know, it's a big thing. You have great knowledge. You actually have great knowledge, both of you.
Thank you.
And to come and share it is, it's a total treat for us, isn't it? And Dr. Jamie, I don't know if he's come back, but same for him. It's just so grateful.
No problem. Thank you very much.
For giving us your day. And so I want to give John a plug. He's got some flyers here. Jamie hasn't. He's at Ananda Clinics in Byron. And David, you work a couple of days a week for Barefoot Lawyers. So if you get busted, you could always try him, Barefoot Lawyers. He's got shoes on today, but not normally. And anyway. Anyway, can't thank them enough. Can't thank you enough for coming. They're both going to be here talking at Mardi Gras. Really appreciate it. And there is definitely a bit of food left out there. People are welcome to hang around. There, if you wanted medicine at the Hemp Embassy or to talk to it at the Hemp Embassy, I'd go there straight away because they've been quite busy, but they'll probably close at 5:30. But you can come any day. We're open every day in the Hemp Embassy to talk to people, get some help, whatever. And I would totally recommend John's clinic in Brisbane and Jamie in Byron. And, you know, it's hugely different. My experience is it's hugely different talking to hippies like me who smoked pot for 50 years. We've got our own understandings and ideas, but when you talk to a real doctor who understands how it works, it makes a big difference. And what I've found from you is the ability to fine-tune whatever you're doing, the strains of cannabis. We just grow our pot and smoke it, whereas that's the crudest possible way. There's heaps more understanding, different cannabinoids, different cannabinoid mixes, different strains, and how you use it. This is the new knowledge, really.
It really is.
The future. Can't thank you guys enough.
Thanks for everyone. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Sister. We've got to thank Sister, who's awesome. And you will put these talks on the web in the next week or two?
Yeah, it's always on YouTube, just for the record. These got like 5 or 6 years worth of Medican lectures on YouTube. Just search Nimbin Medican and you'll find them in 3 days' time, these people. Thanks to Facebook and everyone.
No, and I also want to thank the Green Dolphin guys who've recorded all this, done it live stream. Christian and Maria there, they're champions. They will also be at Mardi Gras. And who else did I have to thank? Gail and the kitchen people. Great job. Great job. Thank you everyone who cooked cakes. And thank you for coming. You made it.
And all power to you, Michael, too, for putting it together, helping put it together.